Now we have a very unusual verse. We know the little horn is coming from one of the areas of these four generals, and it's the Seleucid Empire. Again, that big green area we just looked on the map. And again, on the internet, on my website, I have 4 or 5 or 6 maps and charts and aids to help you kind of picture things and get the date lines. And so if you're new with Daniel and you want to get some of the easy on-ramps of the dates and the flow of the information, I encourage you to look at those, and they're all up there right now. Now, here's a very unusual concept. Daniel sees it. He says, verse 10, Daniel chapter 8, verse 10. And it, that means the little horn, that's the Antichrist, he grew up to the host of heaven. What? I've read quite a few commentaries on Daniel, and this is arguably, by many of them, called the hardest verse, the most difficult verse in the whole book of Daniel, right here, verse 10. They go, how does a man grow up? It means progress in his stature. To grow up, it doesn't mean he was 10 years old, now he's 15 years old. It means progress in his spiritual stature to where he affects the host of heaven, the heavenly realm. What man has ever affected the heavenly realm in this kind of major, dramatic, widespread way? And this man, this little horn, he will cast down some of the host. What? Again, commentators go, nobody knows what this means. Or it means exactly what it says. Which is always an option we should consider. But I agree, it is a difficult verse. I don't want to pretend I grasp this verse with clarity, but I don't think we want to get so sophisticated that it doesn't mean what it says. Well, the word host means army. You know, the Lord is called the Lord of hosts. That means he's the Lord of the armies of heaven. So host and army, you can use it interchangeably many places in the Old Testament. So this man grew up, he grew in spiritual stature where he affected the army of heaven. In what sense can a man affect a heavenly or an angelic army? In what way? That he cast down the host. Heavenly beings are cast down to the earth and by the associated with the actions of this man. Well, paragraph 1, it grew up. And again, his spiritual stature continued to increase until. That's what he affected this. That some see this. I think this is a reasonable explanation, though I'm not sure. I want to be cautious on all this. I want to say there's a couple positions on this, and no one seems quite sure on it one way or the other, because we just got to be tentative. But this man grew up and affected the armies of the heavenly realm, the host of heaven. So we see the Antichrist is creating a chain reaction in the spirit realm. That's a quote unquote. That's not I don't know how else to say it. That will affect the host of heaven, which means, the one interpretation is he will affect demonic angels, fallen angels. Demons are fallen angels. You know, the demons are called angels in the Bible. Now, Revelation chapter 12, John the Apostle, and you know the book of Revelation, the book of Daniel are companion books. You've got to read them together. Many of the points that are given to Daniel are elaborated and completed. The thoughts are elaborated on in the book of Revelation. If you read one without the other, you're not going to get the complete picture. But it's interesting that Daniel 12, verse 7 to 9, it has very similar language to Revelation 12, 7 to 9 has very similar language to Daniel chapter 8, verse 10, the verse we're looking at. Look what John saw. Let's look down in verse 7. John saw a war broke out in the heavenly realm. Michael the archangel is fighting the devil. And if you read the whole passage, and all of the demons associated with Satan. And the devil, verse 9, was cast to the earth, because we know the powers and principalities, demonic, are in the heavenly realm. They're in that mid-heavens realm. They're thrown down and cast to the earth in a war of which Michael the archangel and all of his angels are in a battle. It's that Daniel 10, when Daniel prayed and fasted and the angel Michael broke in and the prince of Persia was pushed out of, anyway, he broke in. I won't go through all that right now. But the point being, I believe there is an end time conflict coming described in Revelation 12. I believe Revelation 12 is yet future. And the demonic host are going to be cast down to the ground, and it's going to have, according to Daniel chapter 8, verse 10, the verse we're looking at, it's going to have some association and affiliation with the little horn, with what the Antichrist does. Now that's a bizarre to our natural mind idea, that the demonic realm in the heavenlies will actually be cast down to the earth, and that creates an open heaven for the church. There's no hindrance. But that creates a rage of demonic activity against the people of God on the earth. So there's a greater open heaven, but there's a greater physical conflict on the earth. That's the implication, seemingly, of these events. Let's go to page 5. Now, Daniel 8's one of those visions you got to read a couple times to get. But it's worth it, because again, it's Gabriel's first visit in history, and he's preparing the people of God for the glory and the trauma of that time frame in history. Verse 11. Let's go down to paragraph C, towards the end of page 5. Verse 11, and he, that's the little horn, the Antichrist, that's the one who threw the host of heaven to the ground in the verse before. That's the he. This man exalted himself as high as the prince of the armies of heaven. That's Jesus. In other words, this man claimed to be God. And by him, he removed the daily sacrifices. Because what the storyline, the narrative is, the Antichrist will present himself as a man of peace on the front end. He'll make peace in the Middle East. And part of the bargaining of peace in the Middle East is he allows the Jews to rebuild their temple. That's yet future. That's not happened yet. The Jews want to build the temple, but there's going to be a man against all odds that will bring peace in the Middle East. And part of the deal is he lets the Jews build the temple, and part of the deal also is they get to re-engage and do the sacrifices from the Old Testament days in that temple. And it's really important to the Jewish, the radical rabbinic community. The temple's built. The sacrifices are happening because to them, that means now the Messiah will come. So to the conservative, devout Jews, this is really big to have the sacrifices offering, because that's related to their Messiah coming. Well, this man, he allows the temple to be built, allows the daily sacrifice to start, but somewhere in the process, we're going to break it down more in the future, in the visions here, in the future classes, he stops the daily sacrifices, which is paramount to saying you can't do the temple activities, which to the devout Jews, that means your Messiah is not coming back. He's interfering with that conviction of theirs. This is really big when he stops the daily sacrifices. Verse 12. But because of sin, transgression, put the word sin there, an army will be given over to the Antichrist. In the economy of God and the sovereignty of God, because of sin of Jews and sin of Gentiles, God will allow the Antichrist to have access to a huge military force. And he will use this army It will be given over to the horn, the Antichrist, and he will use this army, he'll use military power to oppose, to stop the daily sacrifices, that it was him that allowed them to start it just some time earlier. And notice it says that this man casts truth down to the ground. That is one of the primary things the Antichrist will do, cast truth down to the ground. You know, over the last months, I've been talking about Psalm 2, how the kings of the earth, and I have this in the notes, the kings of the earth are going to gather together in order to drive the influence of the Word of God completely out of the culture. Well, when the Antichrist, the little horn, comes into world power, his goal is to cast truth down to the ground. There is no truth about Jesus that is allowed to be openly declared. There is no morality, the kingdom morality. It's all open. There's murder and immorality and occult activity. He flings truth to the ground, one translation says. But the most confusing thing at the end of verse 12, he did all this and he prospered. So believers who are not equipped with the knowledge of what's happening, because he only prospers for 3.5 years, but believers who don't know this, they're very confused by the prosperity of this man. And there'll be a lot of believers that will actually deny the faith and go with him. They'll say, the favor of God's on him. And this man will have a temporary success, and so people will say, hey, there's a momentum, it must be good. They're going to join in with him, but it's only a 3.5-year prosperity. It will confuse some of the believers, and it will embolden the wicked with confidence to really go wholehearted. They'll say, everything he touches turns to gold. But what they don't know is his prosperity only lasts 3.5 years, then he's suddenly destroyed.